Well, my first disclaimer is that this is not a talk about sex. So sit back and relax. My second disclaimer is the quotation, adultery of the brain, is not my quote. It's something that Virginia Woolf said back in 1938. And when she was using the phrase adultery of the brain, what she meant was when she had to write something that she didn't really believe in, but she needed a paycheck, she felt as though she were committing adultery of the brain. She was cheating on herself. But where I actually came across this phrase was in a wonderful book by a psychologist named Carol Gilligan, and the book is called Joining the Resistance. And she uses this quote to describe that period in a young adolescent girl's life when she realizes she has a choice to make. She can be her confident, competent, centered little self, or she can have friends, she can fit in, she can get a boyfriend, she can get a job, she can get successful in life, but she won't really be able to do both. And so what she begins to do is to cheat on herself. She begins to make those adjustments that culture requires of her to fit in. And little by little, she begins to lose who she really is. And when I first read this quotation by Carol Gilligan in her work, it really hit me between the eyes. Because if you were to ask me, for probably the majority of my adult life, who are you? My answer would probably be, who do you want me to be? Because I can do it. I've done it in jobs, I've done it in life, and I can be who you want me to be. Now the problem is, at a certain point, you forget who you are. I had a talk, I have two beautiful daughters, one of them in the audience today, the other goes to school at a very nice college on the East Coast. We have lots of long talks. And she asked me the other day, Mom, what happened to my 5-year-old self? And I said, probably the better question is, how are you going to get her back? And that's what this talk is about, is getting that 5-year-old back. Adultery of the brain, why women commit it, and how to stop. Now, most of us didn't start out that way. When I was a little child in Grand Island, Nebraska, I don't think I really even knew that I was a girl. My dad was a high school football coach, basketball coach, baseball coach, and the only way he knew how to play with my brother and me was to play ball. And I could field grounders and pop flies with the best of them. My older brother had to keep track of me. And so he'd drag me around to the ball fields, and of course the boys didn't want to let me play, and he'd say, let her play, she's better than you are. And I was. And we'd play games like war, very politically incorrect, Cowboys and Indians, King of the Hill, all those things. And it was wonderful. I mean, I had a baseball card collection that would probably have funded my retirement if my puppy basset hound hadn't chewed it up. I mean, that's the kind of kid I was. And then, just as I was entering adolescence, we moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, for my dad's work, and everything changed. Girls played with girls and boys played with boys, and I played with the girls. And I had friends, and we played things like Chinese jump rope and hopscotch and jacks and board games. Boring. And it was around this time that my mother sat me down for the talk. And I'm sure she was anticipating this mother-daughter bonding moment, and I just started bawling. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Every month. Around that time, I entered junior high. We didn't have middle school. I'll show you how old I was. And I entered middle school, or junior high. And everything changed. All of a sudden, everything I was good at was no longer valued. I was smart. That certainly wasn't valued. I was a good athlete. That wasn't valued. I was mature. I don't think I ever giggled in my life. That wasn't valued. Everything that was valued, I didn't really care about. I didn't know how to wear makeup. I didn't know how to flirt. I didn't know how to be popular. And that seemed to be the end-all goal for any middle school, junior high age girl. And from my vantage point, I thought boys had it easier. Now, I realize boys have their own issues, but this is my talk. And from a distance, it seemed they just had to get more of what they already were. They had to get bigger rather than smaller. They had to get more athletic rather than less. They had to get more educated rather than less. And it was okay that they had body hair, and it wasn't okay that we did. And if they got mad, they could fight, get it over with, and move on. And we couldn't do that. I entered adolescence competent, confident, centered. I exited with very low self-esteem, low self-confidence, and a borderline eating disorder. Now, you would think, you would hope, this was in the late 60s, late 60s, early 70s that I was a teenager. You'd think things had changed. But unfortunately, they haven't. And if anything, they've gotten worse. One of the things is my daughter, who goes to this nice college on the East Coast, they do research with their freshmen and their exiting seniors. And what they find out is that the girls coming in, when they leave, they are less self-confident, have lower self-esteem, and more eating disorders. Have we gotten any better? Okay. No, we haven't. And the problem is it doesn't really change when you get out of college and you get that job and you want to fit in, you get married, you have a family. Believe me, it's a whole nother talk, but there is no more competitive sport than motherhood. After a while, it begins to take a toll. And when you talk to women, and in my job and in my role, I talk to lots of women, it ends up that I hear the same story over and over again. And the really sad part of that story is they think they're the only one. We end up wearing this mask, and we wear this persona in order to get along. Now, the problem is when you wear this persona too long and do this pretending too long, it takes a toll. Look at the word disease. Dis-ease. I don't think it's a coincidence. Okay? When you are at unease with yourself, and when you cannot be who you naturally were as a 5-year-old, you are going to have dis-ease. If any of you have read any of Christine Northrup's work, OBGYN, who's very into holistic health, she says a lot of the specific issues that women have health-wise are because of wearing this mask. I came across a lady on the internet. Her name was Bronnie Ware, and she was a hospice nurse. And she had spent years in palliative care, working with people at the end of their lives. And she said she felt incredibly honored to be able to do this. And people go through so much change when they know the end is near. And she published an essay on the internet, and it went so viral that she ended up expanding it into a book. And it's called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And it was amazing when I was reading some of these regrets that people have, how many of them come back to this very issue of not being ourselves. The most common complaint is not being allowed to live the lives we wanted to live or thought we should live, and instead, living the life that other people thought we would. Can you imagine getting to the end of your life and having this regret and knowing you don't have a second chance? Another one, I love this slide. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. And they said it was not unusual at all for people at the end of their life to realize that they had not said the things that they wanted to, and that actually illness had happened because of the bitterness and the resentment they felt from not expressing themselves. 7 years ago this month, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, do I think it was caused because I didn't say what I thought? I can't say. I'm not a doctor, and I don't know that. I do know that I don't want to get to the end of my life and have that regret. I want to express my feelings. And then I love this one. I wish I had allowed myself to be happier. And what she goes on to say is, in the end, happiness is a choice. Circumstances happen to all of us, but happiness is a choice. And many people will convince themselves that they're happy because they're afraid to make a change. And so rather than make that change and step off, they will say, oh yeah, I'm fine, this is what I meant to do. And at the end, they say, I wish I had let myself be happier. So, adultery of the brain, we talked a little bit about that. Why women commit it? It's obviously a culture imperative that we become things that perhaps we aren't. And what do you do about it? Well, the first thing, like any kind of behavior, is you're aware that you do it. And then you make a decision to change. I did that a few years ago. Be careful. It was interesting. I have a tendency, I'm known in my work and my public life, to perhaps say what I think. I try to do it. It's an ongoing journey to say what I think in a good way. Recently, I was at a board meeting of a board that I serve on for an organization, and I didn't agree with something that was going on, and so I stated it. And a little bit later on, in the restroom, a woman comes up to me that I hadn't met yet, and she did this. She kind of looked underneath the stall, see if anybody else was around, and then she said, I just need to tell you, you've got balls. And I was like, okay, the funny thing about that is that's not the first time I've been told that. But what was interesting is when you think about it, okay, you want to compliment a woman for having courage and this authenticity and being assertive, and the only way you can do it is to say she has male anatomy? Now think with me for a minute here. If I were to say, I'm thinking of a woman who's assertive, courageous, and authentic, and the word begins with a B, bitch. Yes, we all know it. Okay, so it's either derogatory or you're a man, because there's no way you can do that and be a woman and have it be a good thing. Okay. Now, delivery is everything. And this is a journey I'm still working on. And one of the things you have to be aware of if you do decide to start speaking out a little bit is that there is a place between silence and violence. Finding it is always interesting. And I have been told that I can jump from silence to violence in warp speed, and I will tell you right now that is not effective. So finding that voice for yourself without taking away somebody else is always very important. But finding your own voice is important. It's interesting. I was reading a book. I told you I had 2 daughters. I was reading a book back in the middle 90s when they were smaller called Reviving Ophelia, Saving the Selves of Our Adolescent Girls. Read it if you have girls, or even if not. It was written by Mary Pfeiffer out of Lincoln, Nebraska, and it was written in the mid-90s. And she saw so many damaged adolescent girls who were perfectly fine 4 years ago. They had good families. It wasn't that. What she came out with is that it was the culture. Our culture is poisonous to girls. Realize this was the mid-90s, before Facebook, before Twitter, before Jersey Shore, before housewives of whatever town you want to live in, those wonderful models of how females should behave with each other. And she was saying the culture is poisonous. And her advice in that book is that if you are going to contradict this, you have got to be consciously countercultural. Now, my girls were younger at this time, but I read that book and I took it to heart. We didn't have cable TV. We didn't have video games. In fact, when some friends of ours came over with their teenage boys and they realized we had neither, they accused me of child abuse. But you have to be very, very clear that the culture is poisonous. It's not out to help you be who you should be. And the book, Reviving Ophelia, Saving the Selves of Our Adolescent Girls, the selves, what happened to that 5-year-old self? And when you hear a woman admired, oftentimes she is told, you are so totally selfless. You care about your family, you care about your parents, you care about your job, you give. I don't think anybody's really, truly that attractive when they don't have a self. So we need to save the selves of our adolescent girls by being consciously countercultural with our daughters, with ourselves, and when we see things, to call them out. I loved the other 2 lady speakers here in this session, and they both ended with an assignment, and I didn't have one. But I realized my last slide is an assignment, and it's assignment from Virginia Woolf, actually. I'll have to look at it here. Pledge yourself not to commit adultery of the brain, because it is a much more serious offense than the other. Thank you.